Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be reviewing MaXXXine. MaXXXine is written and directed by Ty West and stars Mia Goth, Elizabeth Debicki, Moses Sumney, Michelle Monaghan, Bobby Canavale, Giancarlo Esposito, and Kevin Bacon. MaXXXine follows the titular Maxine Minx, an adult film star looking to break into quote-unquote real movies in Hollywood in 1985. She lands a role in a horror film, but is at the same time forced to deal with someone trying to dig up her past and potentially even kill her. MaXXXine is the final film in the X trilogy, following Pearl and X chronologically. So we've made it to the end of Ty West and Mia Goth's X trilogy, which kicked off in 2022 with X, and later kind of exploded in popularity with the prequel Pearl, released later that same year. I don't think you have to watch those films to watch this one, but it would obviously help, and I think I'd probably recommend it. If you have seen either or both of those films, I want to emphasize that this one really isn't anything like those two, much like X and Pearl really aren't very similar either. Ty West has chosen to set each of these in a different time period with a different style, and MaXXXine is very much a flashy 80s slasher film that honestly rides its mystery elements more than its horror ones. Don't go into this expecting the grimy Texas Chainsaw-inspired horror of X or the more character-driven psychological horror of Pearl. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into my actual thoughts on MaXXXine. I think there are two main highlights in MaXXXine, and I think these are also the highlights for the entire trilogy. The first of these being Ty West's ability to recreate the time period and its feel for each of these individual films, with MaXXXine's, of course, being 1980s Hollywood. Right from the start, West drops you into this new setting in all its neon-laced and seedy glory. The soundtrack is great, and the editing feels like something straight out of a B horror movie VHS tape, which is exactly the kind of thing this movie's going for. The film is filled to the brim with references to this era of Hollywood, and even a bit earlier too, and West's reverence for filmmaking and its history cannot be understated. The film is all experienced from Maxine Minx's perspective too, which is one of pure confidence, and you can't help but feel like she runs this version of Hollywood, even if that's far from the case. And this leads us to the second major highlight of MaXXXine and the trilogy as a whole, and that's Mia Goth's performance. I think MaXXXine herself is an infinitely less interesting character than Pearl, which I'll talk about more later, but it can't be denied how good Goth is in this role regardless. Her swagger is effortless, and she truly commands the screen in every scene she's in, which is most of them. It's notable that this is a very different character than Pearl, too, and one with much more screen time than an X, so it wasn't a given that she'd knock this out of the park. But she does, and if nothing else, I hope that this trilogy truly springboards her into horror superstardom. Her performance isn't quite as compelling here as it is in Pearl, but it's still very much a highlight. Unfortunately, we gotta talk about the negatives now, and for me, they outweighed the positives. I wasn't crazy about either X or Pearl, but I thought they were both pretty solid horror films. MaXXXine, though, feels like a fairly significant drop-off to me, though, and I can trace pretty much all of my issues with this movie back to a single source, and that's the writing. I'll start on a small scale and then go from there. The dialogue in this movie is just not it. I'm not going into any horror movie really looking for any sort of fantastic script or anything like that. But the writing here just feels weirdly basic, almost like it's the product of a first-time screenwriter that isn't familiar with the nuance required to write dialogue. But Ty West has been here before, and I honestly thought the writing in Pearl was one of the best parts of that film, so I'm not really sure what happened here. And I know he co-wrote that movie with Mia Goth, and that is not the case for MaXXXine, but I still feel like he's better than this. This is a bit of a detour from the whole writing discussion, but the performances here all kind of feel like they're being overacted in my opinion too. Mia Goth as MaXXXine is a suitably intense performance because MaXXXine is a larger-than-life character, but the rest of the cast kind of feel like they're doing too much, almost as if to match her energy, and I don't know, I have to believe that's a result of poor direction. And when combined with the already lackluster dialogue, it just feels kind of off-putting. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, though. MaXXXine really bogs itself down with plot, and I really don't think it needs to. It's not confusing or anything, it's just weirdly dense. There's the stuff with MaXXXine landing an acting gig, and there's the stuff with the serial killer stalking Hollywood, and there's the stuff with MaXXXine's past getting dug up, and there's the stuff with the detectives investigating MaXXXine's relation to some murders, and there's the stuff with the private investigator following MaXXXine, and you get the point. There's zero breathing room for literally anything besides plot. And unfortunately, the result is that MaXXXine herself is pretty much a nothing character. Like, yeah, she's very confident and wants to be a star, but that's the entirety of her character. And you certainly don't get to know anything about any of the other characters either. Everyone, MaXXXine included, is merely a plot device, and the plot really isn't very good anyway. For as many plot threads as there are, none of them really amount to anything all that satisfying, and the main through line for the entire film honestly just becomes ridiculous by the very end. It's kind of funny in a way, because one of my biggest issues with X and Pearl is how little plot there actually is. And I'm not sure if this was a commonly held issue with those two films or not, but it really kind of feels like Ty West did a massive overcorrection here. There's not really much room for any sort of horror here either, and with the exception of some pretty gnarly practical effects in a few moments, I'd struggle even calling this a horror movie, even though it's very obviously trying to be one. I'd be fine if you decide to do a genre change for MaXXXine, but this was definitely supposed to be a horror movie, and it just doesn't scratch that itch at all. Overall, I found MaXXXine to be pretty disappointing. If you're here purely for a 1980s Hollywood vibe and for another great Mia Goth performance, I think this will probably be enough for you. But if you're like me and you need a little more meat on the bone, I don't think this movie's going to give it to you. The writing in general just feels like a major step backwards, and it truly sinks this film in my opinion. Unfortunately, Ty West fails to stick the landing for his X trilogy with MaXXXine, and I'm going to be giving it a 4 out of 10. If you enjoyed the review, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've seen MaXXXine already, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.